The first gunshot ripped through the stillness of the frontier town, sending Sarah Blackett diving behind a water trough just as bullets splintered the wood above her head. It wasn't exactly how she'd pictured beginning her new life in Redemption Creek, Colorado, in the spring of 1878. "Miss, stay down," a deep voice commanded as a tall figure rolled beside her, revolver drawn. Sarah's breath caught at the sight of his weathered face, piercing green eyes beneath the shadow of a worn Stetson, and a jawline tense with concentration. Blood trickled from a gash across his cheekbone. "I'm not hiding while those men rob the bank," she snapped, pulling a small derringer from her reticule. "My father's life savings are in there." The stranger's eyes widened momentarily before narrowing. "Another fool willing to die for money," he muttered. "Two bandits left side of the bank. I'll draw their fire. You run." "I'm not leaving you. The name's Grant Austin, madam," he said grimly. "And around here, when someone tells you to run, you run." Before she could argue, Grant sprang up, firing two precise shots that sent the would-be bank robbers scrambling. With astonishing speed, he closed the distance and disarmed one man with a vicious blow, while the other fled down an alley. Sarah watched in stunned silence as the townspeople emerged, cheering Grant as he roughly handed the captured outlaw to the sheriff. But there was no triumph in his face, only a distant coldness that sent a shiver through her despite the warm spring air. "That was something, Mr. Austin," she said, approaching him cautiously. "I'm Sarah Blackett, just arrived on this morning's stage. I suppose I owe you thanks for the rescue." He barely looked at her. "Don't thank me, Miss Blackett, just doing what needs doing." "Well, at least let me buy you a drink as gratitude." "I know." The word fell like a stone between them. "I don't socialize. Good day." Sarah watched him stride away, shoulders rigid beneath his worn duster, his limp barely noticeable but betraying an old injury. The curious eyes of townspeople followed her as whispers spread. "Don't mind Grant," said an elderly woman who introduced herself as Martha, the general store owner. "Been that way since he lost Hannah and their baby boy 3 winters back. Pneumonia took them both in a week." "How terrible," Sarah murmured. "Most skilled rancher in the territory, owns the Double Cross 6 miles north, keeps to himself now. They say he swore he'd never let himself care for anyone again." Martha patted her arm. "Now, you mentioned buying the old Whitaker place." "Yes, my father left me enough to purchase it and start a small horse breeding operation. I've worked with horses all my life in Boston, but after Papa died." Sarah trailed off. "I needed a fresh start." "A woman alone breeding horses," Martha's eyebrows rose. "That's mighty unusual even for these parts." "I'm not exactly usual," Sarah replied with a smile. "Now, where might I find the best feed and tack in town?" Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah threw herself into restoring the neglected Whitaker ranch. She hired 2 local boys to help repair fences and clean stables, and purchased 6 quality mares to start her breeding stock. What she needed now was a stallion worthy of her ambitions. The answer came from Martha one afternoon as Sarah picked up supplies. "The Double Cross has the finest quarter-horse stallion in 3 counties. Red Thunder won every race last summer." "Grant Austin's ranch," Sarah frowned. "The very same. He's still breeding champions, even if he barely speaks to a soul." Sarah chewed her lip thoughtfully. "Would he consider stud services?" Martha laughed. "Child, he barely considers good morning, but his foreman, Miguel, handles those arrangements." The next day found Sarah riding her mare along the winding trail to the Double Cross. The ranch sprawled across a lush valley, its buildings meticulously maintained, with sweeping pastures where sleek horses grazed. A far cry from her modest operation. As she approached the main house, Sarah spotted Grant splitting wood by the barn, his powerful strokes revealing a strength his lean frame concealed. He paused, sensing her presence, and turned with obvious displeasure. "Miss Blackett," he acknowledged coldly, "you're trespassing." "Actually, Mr. Austin, I'm here on business. I'd like to discuss breeding arrangements for Red Thunder." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Miguel handles that." "Miguel isn't here, according to your ranch hand. He's in Denver until next week." Grant embedded the axe in the chopping block with unnecessary force. "Then return next week." Sarah dismounted gracefully. "Mr. Austin, I've come 6 miles and my time is valuable. I'm prepared to pay premium rates." Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps respect, however reluctant. "Fine. This way." He led her to the corral where a magnificent chestnut stallion paced, muscle rippling beneath its gleaming coat. Sarah's breath caught. "He's stunning. Best bloodline in Colorado." A hint of pride broke through Grant's cold demeanor, but particular about his mares. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "My girls are exceptional stock, Spanish influence, sturdy but swift." For the next hour they discussed breeding terms, Grant's expertise evident despite his terseness. As they concluded arrangements, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. "Storm's coming," Grant observed. "You should start back." As if summoned by his words, a jagged lightning bolt split the sky, followed by a deafening thunderclap. Red Thunder reared startled, and Sarah's mare broke free from where she'd been tied, bolting toward the hills. "Damn it!" Sarah exclaimed, watching her only transportation disappear. Rain began pelting down in heavy sheets, and Grant roughly took her elbow. "Inside. Now." They dashed to the main house, reaching the porch as the heavens truly opened. Grant pushed open the door, gesturing for Sarah to enter a home that clearly hadn't welcomed a woman in years. It was immaculately clean but Spartan, devoid of any personal touches. "I'll send men for your mare when this passes," Grant said, stoking the fireplace. "There's coffee on the stove." "Thank you." Sarah removed her dripping coat, acutely aware of Grant's discomfort at having her in his space. "You can dry by the fire." He disappeared and returned with a woolen blanket that smelled of cedar. "I have work in the barn." In this downpour, his only response was the closing door. Sarah explored the room, noting the empty spaces on the mantel where family photographs might once have stood. Only one remained, a beautiful dark-haired woman holding a swaddled infant, her smile radiant. Hannah and their son. Outside, the storm intensified, lightning illuminating the valley in harsh white flashes. An hour passed before Grant returned, soaked to the skin and surprised to find Sarah kneading dough at his kitchen table. "What are you doing?" "Making biscuits," she replied simply. "You've flour and lard, and I thought it might be a fair exchange for sheltering me." Grant stared at her, bewildered by this invasion of his carefully maintained solitude. "That's unnecessary. Sit down and get warm, Mr. Austin. You'll catch your death." Sarah paused, wincing at her poor choice of words given his history. "I apologize, I didn't mean stop." His voice was rough. "Just stop." They sat in uncomfortable silence as the biscuits baked, filling the house with a homey aroma it hadn't known in years. When Sarah placed a plate before him, Grant hesitated before taking one. "These are good," he admitted reluctantly after a bite. "My mother taught me. She believed every problem looked smaller with food in your stomach." The rain drummed steadily on the roof. "Your mare won't be found before morning," Grant finally said. "You can take the spare room. He faltered. "It's clean." The bedroom was indeed clean, but painfully preserved, a woman's hairbrush still on the dresser, a child's wooden horse on a shelf. Sarah's heart ached for this man who couldn't let go yet couldn't move forward. Morning brought clearing skies and awkward farewells. Grant's men had located her mare, and he personally escorted Sarah back to her property, maintaining a rigid distance between their horses. "Thank you for the hospitality, Mr. Austin," Sarah said as they reached her modest ranch house. Grant nodded stiffly. "Red Thunder will be ready for your mares next week." With that, he wheeled his horse and rode away, leaving Sarah staring after him with a confusing mixture of frustration and fascination. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed frequently. When a spring flood threatened to wash out Sarah's lower pasture, Grant arrived unannounced with 3 workers to help divert the water. When one of his mares struggled with a difficult foaling, Sarah spent the night at his ranch, her smaller hands proving essential in saving both mother and foal. Each encounter chipped away at the wall Grant had built. He began to linger when delivering Red Thunder for breeding visits, offering gruff advice about ranch improvements or commenting on the progress of her yearlings. Sarah met his terseness with steady warmth, neither pushing nor retreating. The invitation to the town's 4th of July celebration came from Martha, who insisted Sarah attend. "The whole county will be there: food, dancing, fireworks. Good chance to establish yourself socially." "I doubt Mr. Austin attends such frivolity," Sarah remarked, surprising herself with the disappointment in her voice. Martha's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Grant makes an appearance most years. Keeps to himself, but he comes." Sarah chose her best dress for the occasion, a cornflower blue that matched her eyes, with modest lace at the collar and cuffs. She arrived alone, but was quickly absorbed into conversation with neighbors who had begun to accept the unusual horse lady from Boston. She spotted Grant standing apart from the crowd, watching the festivities with detached interest, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Their eyes met across the square, and for once he didn't look away. As twilight settled, the band struck up a waltz. Couples filled the makeshift dance floor, and Sarah found herself approached by Thomas Fletcher, the young banker who had made his interest clear on several occasions. "May I have this dance, Miss Blackett?" Before she could answer, a familiar deep voice intervened. "Miss Blackett promised this dance to me." Grant stood beside her, jaw set determinedly. Thomas retreated with obvious disappointment, and Sarah raised an eyebrow at Grant. "I don't recall promising you anything, Mr. Austin. Would you prefer to dance with Fletcher?" "I would prefer not to be claimed like a piece of property." A hint of a smile, the first she'd seen, tugged at his lips. "Then would you do me the honor of this dance, Miss Blackett?" "I would." His hand at her waist was tentative, as if he'd forgotten the proper way to hold a woman. But as they moved, muscle memory returned, and he guided her with surprising grace for such a taciturn cowboy. "You dance well," Sarah observed. "Hannah insisted I learn." His voice caught on his late wife's name. "She loved dancing." "She sounds like a wonderful woman." Grant's eyes clouded. "She was. Better than I deserved." They completed the dance in silence, but when it ended, Grant didn't immediately release her hand. "Would you walk with me, away from the crowd?" They strolled toward the creek that gave the town its name, the music fading behind them. Fireflies blinked in the gathering darkness, and the first stars appeared overhead. "Why did you come to Redemption Creek?" Grant asked suddenly. "The truth." Sarah considered the question. "My father died, leaving me with means but no purpose." In Boston, a woman of 30 is considered well past her prime, destined for spinsterhood. Here, I can build something that's entirely mine. It's a hard life. So is a meaningless one. Sarah studied his profile in the dimming light. "Why did you stay after your loss?" Grant was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "This land holds everything I've ever loved. Leaving felt like abandoning them again." "Again?" He stared at the water. "I was in Denver buying breeding stock when the fever took them. 3 days away while my wife and son died alone." His voice broke. "I swore I'd never leave myself vulnerable again, never care enough to feel that kind of pain." "And is it working?" Sarah asked gently. Not caring, Grant turned to her, his expression raw with emotion he'd suppressed for years. "It was. Until you arrived with your questions and your biscuits and your stubborn independence." The first explosion of fireworks illuminated the sky, reflecting in the water and across their faces. Grant stepped closer. "I don't know how to do this anymore," he whispered. "I don't know if I can." Sarah reached up, touching his face where the scar from their first meeting had faded to a thin white line. "You don't have to know. You just have to be willing to try." In the glow of distant fireworks, Grant Austin kissed her hesitantly at first, then with growing certainty, like a man rediscovering a part of himself long thought lost. Summer faded into autumn, and their cautious courtship progressed under the watchful eyes of the community. Grant began joining Sarah for Sunday dinners, bringing fresh vegetables from his garden. She accompanied him to cattle auctions, her shrewd assessments earning his professional respect alongside his growing personal admiration. But shadows remained. Grant would withdraw without warning, disappearing for days to ride the far boundaries of his property. Sarah learned to wait, understanding that his grief ebbed and flowed like a tide. The first significant test came with the anniversary of Hannah's death in early December. Sarah arrived at the double cross to find Grant drunk by the fireplace, a tarnished locket clutched in his fist. "Go away," he growled when she entered. "No." She removed the whiskey bottle from his reach. "You don't understand," he said bitterly. "I betrayed her with you." The words stung, but Sarah held her ground. "Loving again isn't betrayal, Grant, it's survival. I promised to love only her, till death." "And death parted you," Sarah said softly. "Hannah wouldn't want this half-life for you. No woman who truly loved a man would want that." Grant's expression crumpled. "How can I be happy when they never will be?" Sarah knelt beside his chair, taking his rough hands in hers. "Living fully honors their memory more than your suffering ever could." For the first time since losing his family, Grant Austin wept harsh, racking sobs that shook his powerful frame. Sarah held him through the storm, murmuring soft words of comfort as the grief he'd locked away finally found release. The next morning, she found him at the small fenced plot behind the house where 2 wooden crosses stood. He was placing fresh evergreen boughs against the winter snow. "I used to talk to them every day," he said without turning. "Lately, I realized I had less to say. Because I was starting to tell my stories to you instead." Sarah remained silent, understanding the magnitude of this confession. "I'll always love them," Grant continued, "but I think there's room in my heart that's still living." When he finally faced her, something had changed in his eyes, a peace that hadn't been there before, making room for something new to grow. 2 weeks before Christmas, Grant proposed. Not with flowery words or grand gestures, but with simple honesty while they mended fence together on the boundary between their properties. "I'm still broken in places," he warned. "I might always be." Sarah smiled. "We're all broken somewhere, Grant, but we fit together well, don't you think?" They married on New Year's Day, 1879, a symbolic fresh start. The ceremony in Redemption Creek's small church was attended by the entire community, many openly weeping at the transformation in the man they'd watched retreat from life years before. Sarah moved to the double cross, bringing her horses and hopes with her. The first changes were small curtains at windows that had been bare for years, flowers on the table, her books mingling with his on shelves. Grant watched each addition with a mixture of apprehension and wonder. "Does it bother you?" she asked one evening, finding him staring at a quilt she'd placed over the back of a chair. "The changes?" He considered carefully before answering. It's like watching spring after a long winter, strange at first, then increasingly right. Their first major disagreement came in March, when Sarah proposed converting part of the east pasture to an expanded breeding program. It's prime grazing land, Grant argued. It's underutilized, Sarah countered. My breeding pair from Kentucky arrives next month, and we need proper facilities. I've run this ranch successfully for 12 years, and now we're running it together, Sarah interrupted. Unless that was just words at our wedding. They glared at each other across the kitchen table, both stubborn, both passionate about the land they stewarded. Finally, Grant sighed. Show me the plans again. Marriage was an adjustment for both, Grant learning to consult rather than command, Sarah adapting to partnership after years of independence. They argued, compromised, and gradually found their rhythm, their different strengths creating a formidable team. By summer, the expanded breeding operation was thriving. Word spread about the quality stock at the Double Cross, bringing buyers from as far as California. Sarah's innovative breeding techniques complemented Grant's traditional ranching knowledge, resulting in horses that combined beauty with practical strength. On their 6-month anniversary, Grant surprised Sarah with a gift, a set of photographs taken in town. The first formal images of them as a couple, to be framed and placed on the mantel that had stood empty for so long. I thought it was time, he said simply. Sarah studied the photographs, then looked at the single remaining image of Hannah and the baby. Should we put these away? She asked gently. Grant considered the question. No, they're part of our family story too. Our past shapes our present. As autumn painted the valley in russet and gold, Sarah fell ill with persistent morning sickness. Dr. Wilson confirmed what they had begun to suspect: a baby would join their household by spring. Grant received the news with complex emotion. Joy mingled with resurgent fear, memories of loss threatening to overshadow hope. That night, Sarah found him in the nursery that had been closed since his son's death, running his fingers over the dusty crib. We can use a different room, she offered, understanding his hesitation. Grant shook his head. No, this room was built for laughter and new life. It's waited long enough. He pulled her close, hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. I'm terrified, he admitted, but I refuse to let fear steal this joy from us. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through winter, the whole community rallying around them with support and excitement. Grant became increasingly protective, hiring additional help so Sarah could rest despite her protests that women have been having babies while working since the beginning of time. In April 1880, after a difficult but ultimately successful labor, Sarah delivered a healthy daughter with Grant's green eyes and her own determined chin. What shall we name her? Sarah asked as Grant cradled the infant with newfound confidence. Grace, he suggested. For the unexpected gift she is. Grace Hannah Austin, Sarah amended softly, Grant's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. It's perfect. As spring renewed the land, the Austin family settled into their new reality. The Double Cross thrived under their joint stewardship, becoming known not just for its horses, but as a place where lost souls could find work and purpose. Grant, once the most isolated man in the county, gradually became its heart, his hard-won wisdom and quiet strength earning deep respect. On warm evenings, neighbors might spot the once lonely cowboy sitting on his porch, baby daughter in one arm, his free hand clasped with his wife's as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold. And if they looked closely, they might see what Sarah had seen from the beginning beneath the scars of a man who had sworn never to love again. Beat the heart of one who had simply needed to be reminded how. 5 years to the day after they met, Grant and Sarah stood on the hill overlooking both their original properties, now merged into one thriving operation. Their daughter Grace played nearby with her 3-year-old brother Thomas, both children strong and vibrant against the backdrop of the land that had witnessed so much heartache and healing. "You ever regret it?" Grant asked, watching Sarah's face in the golden afternoon light. "Marrying a broken cowboy who didn't know how to love anymore," Sarah smiled, the lines around her eyes testament to both hardship and joy. "You were never broken, Grant Austin, just deeply wounded. And you always remembered how to love, you just needed the courage to try again." He pulled her close, this woman who had brought spring back to his winter. "Thank God you were stubborn enough not to give up on me." "I never will," she promised as their children's laughter echoed across the valley, the sweetest music in a life rebuilt from ashes, proving that even the most guarded heart could find its way home again.